would request Professor Sam Taraporevala. He is Director of Xavier Resources Center for Visually Impaired, Mumbai, St. Xavier College, Mumbai. The topic is Disability Exception and the Triumph of Collaborative Advocacy. Mr. Sam.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Raghavendra, and many thanks to Professor Shamnath Bashir, the university, and all the organizers for hosting such an interesting and theme-based seminar. As Mr. Raghavendra mentioned, we're focusing on the disability exception, but I just like to hark back to the theme of the seminar, and that is finding the right balance. I remember as a child, and I think many of you may have also gone to a children's garden and played on a seesaw. And invariably the game involved one side up, one side down, but sometimes I would try to get my counterpart on the other side to say, let's try to balance. Oftentimes it was not possible because one of us was heavier than the other. And perhaps in that sense, finding the balance becomes that much more difficult. But with regards the exception I'm going to be speaking about right now, I tend to believe that overall, well, there are no winners and no losers, and the best way to know whether something has succeeded is that everybody walks away equally dissatisfied. So the theme, are you ready? Is something which paper we've worked together with Mr. Rahul Cherian, who is not here, from Inclusive Planet, Shamnath, who is here. And I'm going to be focusing on the key theme. Well, the first point is the elusive barrier for whom. Now we're talking about persons with disability. Imagine, just for a moment, I don't want to frighten you, but imagine that you cannot see, and I come and give you a hard copy book. Please go to chapter 42 and read paragraph 5. You're going to be wondering what you could do with it, unless you had a human assistant, or, as I would touch upon a little later, other ways of reading it. So we're talking about print disabled persons, print impaired persons, call them what you want. Or let's take another example. Forget persons who are blind. Take an instance of somebody with an orthopedic condition. You're okay in terms of your sight, but for whatever reason you do not have the use of your upper arms. You're given a book and you read it. Or let's say that you have one of multiple learning disabilities, which prevents your using a book effectively, but with the aid of other software-driven systems, perhaps you can read. This is the target audience we are talking about, and they don't make up a huge vote bank, but they do make up a significant minority across the country. Very, very few books, just a minuscule percentage of books, are being converted into what is described as accessible formats. Accessible formats are those that technology can be used to bring alive for a person who's print disabled or print impaired. Today, apart from Braille, which I'm using right now, one can use a whole range of other technologies like computers. Computers have what is called screen readers, which voice out everything. I can use OCR just as many of us do scan a book, but I can use an optical character recognition system to scan a book and with the help of other assistive tools read it. A person who does not have the use of upper arms can use a headset on a computer and can actually read a book. a person who has dyslexia can get the part of the book he or she wishes to read on a monitor highlighted with the help of a mouse so that there is a perfect visual fix. So technology does provide the answer, but our Copyright Act 1957, naturally when it was first drafted, nobody had even thought of those technologies, was not in tune, and even the last amendment in the late 90s didn't keep in pace. Next, globally. Globally, things had started moving. We've had over 50 countries passing suitable amendments to their legislations, depending whether it was on copyright or special legislations, to make for exceptions. Next. Now, in India, what was the scenario like? The unique Indian situation was such that very, very few books were available in accessible format. And what I'm going to talk about are two parallel processes that took place in India. I'm calling them the legal story and the ground zero efforts. The ground zero efforts is the work of different civil society groups, and the legal effort was what we tried to push ahead with the government. Next. Now, the whole effort started sometime early in 2002 or 2003, when a professor at Delhi University, he was an English professor in one of the colleges, Professor Venna, went and actually gave presentation to the committee. I think Professor NSG was there, and if I mistake not, modifies the book to make it readable. It should not be an offense. In 2006, when the Copyright Office put up its notice on their website asking for feedback, we at the Xavier's Resource Center for the Visually Challenged had just got into researching the whole copyright issue. We had contacted Professor Vinod Sinha just by way of reason how we got in, a very quick narration. I'm a professor at St. Xavier's, and we set up a resource center for the blind. And one of the students who was studying his third year of economics, he's a blind person, he came up to me and said, I need this book on Indian economics as a soft copy. I said, look, you have a hard copy, you have a scanner, scan it. He says, no, I can't, because there are lots of tables, and if I start scanning, it's never 100% accurate. Please, talk to the publisher. So I phoned up the publisher, and the publisher said, I'll give you a complimentary hard copy. You're doing a noble job. And I hate that type of statement. So I said, I don't need your hard copy. It's with me. Our library has it. And in fact, the student has bought a hard copy, but he's having problems. He said, no, I will never give you a soft copy. It will be a copyright infringement. And I said, look, I'll give you a written undertaking that he will read the book on our computers and there will be security. I kept pestering him for 10 days almost. Finally, he got so fed up of me, he said, get me a letter from the HRD minister and then I may consider. And that's the time I said, we need to amend the Copyright Act in India. So that's when we got into researching things, and we contacted Professor Vinod Sinha. Unfortunately, he died 2 years later in 2007. So he never lived to see the change that he actually had enunciated. And we then organized ourselves into what we call the Publication Access Coordination Committee. We brought some civil society groups together and gave in a representation. At that time, Professor Madhukar Sinha was there. Sorry, Dr. Madhukar Sinha was there, and I remember discussing with him on the phone off and on in terms of what our contention was. Around the same time, the Center for Internet and Society also gave in their representation. Theirs was a much more comprehensive one. Ours was only focusing on the exception for disability. CIS went in terms of a whole range of provisions. Now, the situation as it prevailed in India at that time was that, number one, I have two copyright registrars here. They kept changing, and in fact our joke was that our role is to sensitize bureaucrats more than anything else, because I think we had 4 copyright registrars. So Mr. Raghavendra is the 4th one, and when he came, we had an interaction with him, and we only hoped and prayed that he at least would stay on, because otherwise we were starting from zero. Anyway, coming back to the legal effort. Next one. Now, the clause that was put forward by the Copyright Office, this was in 2006. You have it on your screen. Slide 7. We had certain problems with it, mainly concerning the fact that this term reproduction, what it meant, there was confusion. Would it mean identical to identical copy? What if I took a hard copy book and scanned it and made it into an electronic copy? Would it mean reproduction? We questioned that. We didn't think so. And our real problem was that it was not format neutral. It spoke in effect of special formats, and we were very, very concerned with that terminology. A special format, ultimately, specially designed was the term, would mean it is only for a special target group, meaning Braille. In fact, not all the blind even read Braille because of late blindness and other conditions. So we had a major problem. We kept lobbying with the Copyright Office, but frankly, for quite some time, the amendment went into cold storage. So, continuing the legal story, we took up the issue at various levels, and actually in 2009 what happened is CIS, then Inclusive Planet, and we got together and said we need to start pushing it, because we are hearing that the copyright bill may be tabled sometime. So we made a very strong representation. We went as a group and met Mr. Kapil Sibal, but very honestly we came out of the meeting totally disheartened. So the seesaw went the other way. We were told that we are going to have special formats, and we said no, that word is not acceptable, because it means that might as well don't have an exception. And even to produce Braille commercially, or in terms of mass production, today you need software where you will feed in say a Microsoft Word document. Now, in order to create that, you need that soft copy. Does it mean that therefore even Braille can't be produced? So we were very, very concerned, but frankly we were wondering what to do. We then started a much more aggressive campaign. We organized ourselves into what is called NAA, National Access Alliance, and as the National Access Alliance, we started holding press conferences across the country. We also were part of a global, what is called Right to Read campaign, and this was actively held in Kolkata. I think that's the time Professor Shamnath Bashir got very actively involved with the movement, in Bangalore and in Mumbai, and we had just a random sample of over 600 authors and over 50 publishers telling us, look, we have no problem with such an exception. We support the right to read. So what happened then was in 2010, in April, the government was going to be tabling the bill. Now, because we were so dissatisfied having met Mr. Kapil Sibal at that time, we had to go and meet leaders of opposition parties and said, look, if the clause that comes has this, please speak up and make sure the bill is referred to a standing committee, because it cannot be allowed to pass and become an act. That's precisely what happened. And we were called in to the standing committee. meeting, because if you had seen the previous, the wording of the bill, it was extremely problematic. Just go back for a moment. It again, yeah, no, 8. So if you see the bottom part of the slide, it has the wording, and it's again only going on special formats. So we were very opposed to it for the following reasons. Next. These were the basic reasons why we opposed the particular draft. Primarily to do with specially designed being the term, and the worst was the problematic licensing policy even for non-governmental organizations. So much so that the way the wording of the particular licensing system was that college libraries which may run resource centers were also disqualified, because their primary purpose was not the process of working for disability. They were there for education, but then technically under the draft they were disqualified. 10. And continuing with the legal story, the basic push that we had was that, look, we need to do the following, and that's what we put forward to the standing committee. We needed a format neutral clause. We needed a clause which would not discriminate between persons with disability, because technically Braille was allowed but other formats were not allowed. We needed a condition where the end user was the focus rather than the format. And most importantly, we wanted that cumbersome licensing policy out. Next. So finally, the focus moved, and we got the government to come out with their clause. It's I won't read it, it's pretty long, but it in essence brings out what we were asking for all along, namely that it was format neutral, it allowed for sharing of resources. Now just take a situation where accessible book is created, let's say in Mumbai at our college in St. Xavier's College, and somebody in Delhi needs it. Does it mean that they would again have to create it themselves? Couldn't it be possible to be shared? There were models, for example, in the US, a library called Bookshare, which perfectly allowed this legally. So we said, why not bring in such a system? And therefore, sharing among individuals is allowed. Sharing from organizations to individuals is allowed. The format has to be an accessible format. We are not defining what that format is, because technology keeps changing. And very importantly, yes, from the point of view of the publisher as a stakeholder, we need to take reasonable precautions. We all are careful about it. We don't condone piracy. Neither do we say that the rights holder should not get their due. However, having said that, if as organizations we are sure with whom we are sharing the content are genuine bona fide parties, we need to make sure that the individual definitely gets the benefit. Also, what got included were libraries across the board. Okay, next. The other provision had to do with the licensing system, which was for profit. It's a huge clause. Again, I'm not reading through it. This is under section 31. Next. I need to go fast so that Mr. Raghavendra is going to hit the guillotine very shortly. Okay, now going into just the ground zero efforts. Parallel to that, I've mentioned about organizations working. In 2007, the DAISY Forum of India, this is an umbrella body of over 80 organizations working for persons with blindness in promoting access. We got together and formed this organization. It's part of a global body actually. And the idea being that there is sharing between organizations, so that duplication is cut out. It costs almost anything between 5 and 15,000 rupees to make an accessible copy. The publisher is not giving it to us. Around the same time as this lobbying was happening, we did contact publishers, and you have a list of some of the major publishers who got on stream. In fact, they not only gave us permission, but they started giving us a soft copy of books. So that was very encouraging. And in fact, just an aside, the same publisher who refused to give us that economics book, 2 years after that 2006 incident, in 2008, he also started giving us his soft copy. Except that I congratulated him for putting us all into the copyright amendment movement. Anyway, next. Continuing with the ground zero efforts, we have a long way to go in terms of the right to read campaign that I mentioned was pushed on in different cities. Next. In terms of where are we right now, we are at a stage that we need to make sure that the Act is implemented in letter and spirit. More importantly, we are now looking at the way that a right to education makes sure that children in school actually get their textbooks on time. Even today, accessible books reach school children almost 4 to 6 months after they are available for sighted children. And that's a huge problem. We're also looking at trying to amend another very important legislation, because that debate is going on about that. Ujjwala just mentioned one of the libraries, and this is the Delivery of Books and Periodicals Act, which is due for amendment. And we've started interacting with the Culture Ministry on a very basic basis right now, and we'll be going into more detail in terms of trying to ensure that accessible copies are also deposited. Because there is a whole section for e-books that's going to come in. But an e-book as an image is of no use. An e-book in computer readable, accessible format is of value. Next. We also need to look at a type of a national library for accessible content. Why only preserve content which is for the in terms of sight, but if you are looking at a more inclusive society, you need to look at accessible content. India is a signatory to the UNCRPD, the United Nations Convention on Rights of Persons with Disability. We are also driven by other goals, whether it's Millennium Development Goals or anything else. And we need to look at access in a very big way.
Please wind up into.
Sure. I'm winding up faster than that, don't worry. Okay, at the global level, it's 18. Mr. Raghavendra has spoken also about what's happening at WIPO. India is taking a strong stand, and we are at a stage where there is talk of a treaty happening. Whether it will happen, well, the next few weeks, months are very, very critical. Next. The issues in terms of the treaty are before you, and let's see how we proceed further, because next last one, 17th, 18th December are critical dates. We keep our fingers crossed that the US doesn't ball its typical masterstroke of trying to change things. We're trying to get people to speak in one voice, and the main lesson of this whole process has been a process of speaking in one voice, getting diverse NGOs to share a common vision, a common goal, and working together. Mr. Raghavendra, with your permission, I'll just ask Shamnath to speak for 2 minutes. Yeah. Okay, fine. Okay.
Thank you, Professor Sam Taraporevala. You have covered entire history of the introduction of the provision, acceptance and limitations for physically disabled, which includes all kinds of disabled persons. And also you gave several steps and what are the developments, and then final refinement, and then now we're all proud of this exception, because this is the best exception provided for the visually impaired persons. In fact, when this was introduced in Rajya Sabha, the then Honorable HRM Kapil Sibal got outstanding applause from all MPs sitting there, whether it is left, right, or central or regional parties, for two reasons: for taking up the cause of clarifying the rights of authors and composers, and the second one is visually impaired persons.
Mr. Raghavendra, just one aside. When we had to go to opposition leaders and tell them, please disrupt Parliament, just before the May session, we had to go around telling them, please support the bill now, don't disrupt. When we went there, the first question they said, do you have a problem? Should we disrupt? We said, no, please. Now you have to make sure the bill gets passed. And they said, don't worry, we'll make sure.
I know there are many people who work hard for getting the bill passed. Of course, you people have helped a lot. Of course, Mr. Javed Akhtar also, other side. Thank you. And now we will take questions, 2 questions, please. Any new person? Okay, Dr. Madhukar.
Raghavendra, I will let there be 2 questions. I'll just say one thing. Professor Taraporevala has been generous in congratulating me as well as you for the success of this exception. The credit is not due to us. So I think all of us should join hands and applaud Professor Taraporevala and his friends who have brought about this amendment. It is a classic amendment to our...
Thank you, Dr. Sinha, but the fact that we could interact openly, even though we may have had our differences with your office and Mr. Raghavendra, was very, very important. And plus, it was honestly a team effort across the country, and that itself was education and advocacy, and so as a social movement, making disparate groups actually speak in one voice. So if you have any questions, otherwise I'm sure the belly is growling for food.
Okay, thank you. I would like to thank all the panelists, Professor Sam Taraporevala, Ms. Ujjwala, and Abhishek Malhotra, and my young friend Amlan Mohanty. And it's a very thoughtful discussions and very good questions asked. And all the panelists covered all the important issues very comprehensively, and they analyzed the amendments in the Copyright Amendment Act 2012 very nicely, and then very informative information they have given. I would like to thank all of them, and again I would like to thank Professor Shamnath Basir giving all of us this opportunity to share our views with you. Thank you.
And Mr. Raghavendra, we'd like to present you with a token of our appreciation. Thank you so much for being here today. I'd also like to thank all our panelists and offer them a gift on our behalf. I gave this warning yesterday, but the gift is somewhat unusual and in the spirit of creativity, so we hope that you get to solve it on your way home on the flight. That's our suggestion. So we'd like to present a gift first to Ganesh Prakash for his paper presentation in the morning. Then to Abhishek Malhotra, sir. To Amlan Mohanty. Ujjwala Upalari from our university. And finally, thank you so much, Mr. Taraporevala. That was a very interesting presentation. Now, this is the most crucial announcement. We have a break for lunch right now, but we're going to give you only 25 minutes to eat. So please come back by 2 o'clock, because one of our speakers has a flight which is right at the end of the time scheduled for the last session. So we're really running by the clock. So please come back as soon as you can. By 2 o'clock, we should see you all back here. Thank you.